The silence in the restaurant was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us. My father raised his glass, looking past me as if I were invisible. To Chantel, he boomed, "The only child who has ever made me proud." My heart stopped. But then I felt the warm, rough hand of my husband Dante squeezing mine under the tablecloth. His whisper was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. "Time to tell them, Simone. Time to tell them you own the bank that holds their mortgage." I am Simone, 32 years old. For years I have been the family punching bag, the disappointment, the failure who dropped out of law school to play with computers. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the funeral of my relationship with them. Before I reveal how I turned this dinner into the most satisfying revenge of my life, please hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you have a sibling who gets credit for everything while you do all the work. The Sterling Steakhouse in downtown Chicago is not just a restaurant. It is a stage where the city elite come to perform wealth. The walls are mahogany, the carpet is thick enough to swallow your ankles, and the menu has no prices. My father Otis sat at the head of the table, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He had spent weeks bragging about this retirement dinner. He wanted everything perfect, well perfect, for Chantel. My sister sat to his right, draped in a gold dress that screamed for attention. She looked at me with that pitying smile she perfected in high school. Dante and I were seated at the dead end of the table, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a waiter walked out, a blast of hot air and shouting hit us. It was deliberate. My father wanted to remind us of our place. We were the help, not the guests. I looked down at my outfit. A plain black cashmere t-shirt and dark trousers. To my father, I looked like a nobody. He did not know that this single t-shirt cost $2,000 and was made of the finest vicuna wool. He did not know that Dante's worn leather watch strap was attached to a vintage timepiece worth more than Chantel's car. To them, we were poor, especially to Bradley. My brother-in-law sat across from us, swirling his scotch. He is a stockbroker who spends more money than he makes. He nudged Chantel and pointed his fork at Dante. "Hey, Dante," Bradley said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I see you are still wearing those sneakers. Are things that tight at home? Listen, after dinner, why don't you drive my car around to the front? I will give you a $50 tip. You look like you need it." The waiter poured a vintage Cabernet into my father's glass, the dark red liquid swirling like blood. Otis raised his hand to silence Bradley's laughter, but his eyes were cold as they landed on me. He did not defend Dante. He did not tell his son-in-law to show respect. Instead, he stood up, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket with a deliberate slowness that commanded the room's attention. Everyone fell silent. Otis cleared his throat and lifted his glass high. To Chantel, he announced, his voice booming with a pride that he had never, not once in 32 years, directed at me. "To the only daughter who truly understands what it means to carry the Brooks name with dignity. To the only child who has made something of herself." I felt Dante's leg press firmly against mine under the table. It was a silent signal to breathe. My father turned his gaze toward me, and the warmth in his eyes instantly froze. "And then there is Simone." He sighed theatrically, shaking his head, as if my very existence was a burden he had carried for too long. Simone, who had every opportunity, every advantage, and threw it all away to sell computer games. "I sell enterprise software for hospital management," I corrected him calmly, keeping my voice steady. Otis waved his hand dismissively. "Computer games, software. It is all the same nonsense. It is not a career. It is a hobby for children who refuse to grow up. Look at your sister. Chantel is a visionary. She is building an international fashion empire. She is out there in the real world making deals, meeting investors, expanding our legacy. While you sit behind a screen in a dark room wasting your potential." Chantel preened, adjusting the strap of her dress. She did not have an empire. She had an Instagram account with bot followers and a garage full of unsold polyester dresses she imported from overseas websites. But to my father, appearance was the only reality that mattered. Otis took a deep breath, preparing for the final blow. Because of this disparity in achievement and maturity, I have made a decision regarding my estate. As you know, I am stepping down from the firm next month. I need to ensure that the family wealth is in capable hands. Therefore, I have instructed my lawyers to draft a new will. He paused for dramatic effect. The air in the room felt thin. Effective immediately, the title to the family estate in Hyde Park, along with the entirety of my investment portfolio, will be transferred to Chantel. My stomach dropped, not because I needed the money, but because of the sheer cruelty of it. That house was where my mother had raised us. It was where she had died. Otis continued staring straight at me with a challenge in his eyes. Simone, you will receive nothing. You have chosen your path of mediocrity, so you can finance it yourself. I will not have my hard-earned legacy squandered on failed software experiments. The house, the stocks, the vintage car collection, it all goes to the winner. It all goes to Chantel, so let us drink. To Chantel, the future of this family. Chantel pressed a manicured hand to her chest, feigning shock. Her eyes, however, glittered with pure greed as they darted between our father and the expensive bottle of wine on the table. "Oh, Daddy, this is too much," she cooed, leaning over to kiss his cheek, leaving a smear of red lipstick on his jaw. "I do not do it for the reward. I do it for the family name." It was a lie so bold it almost commanded respect. She accepted the legacy, the house, and the millions in assets without a single second of hesitation. She did not even pretend to ask if I should receive a share. In her mind, the hierarchy was natural. She was the queen and I was the peasant at the gate. Then she turned her gaze to me. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a sugary condescension that was far more cutting than my father's open disdain. "Simone, sweetie," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper meant for everyone at the table to hear. "Please do not look so tragic. It really brings down the mood. I know things have been hard for you lately. Bradley told me he thought he saw your car parked in a tow zone last week because you could not afford the garage fee. That was a fabrication. My car was a custom armored SUV currently parked in the VIP lot of my office building, but I let her talk. I let her dig the hole deeper. Tell you what," Chantel continued, spearing a piece of lobster from the seafood tower the waiter had just placed down. "I will not be able to finish all this food. It is entirely too rich for my diet. I will have the waiter pack up the leftovers for you. It might save you on groceries for a few days. Consider it my first act of charity as the head of the family. You can take it home to that little apartment of yours." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the linen napkin in my lap. The humiliation was a physical blow, a sharp heat rising up my neck. But it was not just the lobster comment that stung. It was the memory that crashed into me, unbidden and sharp as a knife. I was 10 years old again, standing in the marble foyer of our childhood home with a report card full of straight A's. I had presented it to my father with trembling hands, waiting for a smile, a hug, anything. He had glanced at it, muttered "fine," and went back to his newspaper. 10 minutes later, Chantel had walked in with a report card full of C's and 1 B in art. My father had thrown his paper down, scooped her up, and shouted that she was a creative genius. That afternoon, she got a brand new pink bicycle with streamers on the handlebars. I got to watch her ride it from the window of the room where I studied. The laughter of the table brought me back to the present. Bradley was chuckling into his drink. "Generous of you, babe," he said to Chantel. "Feeding the needy. That is very Christian of you." I smoothed the napkin on my lap, forcing my breathing to slow down. My face remained composed, my heart hardening into a block of ice. I looked at the lobster on her plate, then at her smug, beautiful face. "No, thank you, Chantel," I said softly, my voice cutting through their laughter. "I am not hungry for your scraps. Not anymore." The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on, but Bradley seemed immune to it. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice cubes clinking against the crystal with a rhythmic, annoying sound. He was already 3 drinks in, and the alcohol had loosened whatever flimsy filter he usually kept in place. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting from me to Dante. To Bradley, my husband was nothing more than a prop, a silent shadow in a room full of what he considered important people. He reached out and slapped a heavy hand on Dante's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look friendly but felt entirely possessive. "Hey, big guy," Bradley said, his voice loud enough to turn heads at the nearby tables. "You have been sitting there quiet as a mouse all night. Do you even speak? Or do you just nod when Simone tells you to?" Dante slowly turned his head to look at the hand on his shoulder. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten just once. He did not brush the hand away. He did not need to. The coldness in his eyes made Bradley pull back instinctively, though he tried to cover it with a nervous chuckle. "I was just thinking." Bradley continued, recovering his arrogance quickly. "My driver has the night off, and I plan on celebrating this new partnership with your father properly, meaning I'm going to get wasted. Since you are not drinking that fancy wine, how about you drive my Porsche around later, drive me and Chantel home?" I stiffened, ready to snap, but Dante squeezed my hand under the table again. Bradley dug into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $50 bill, tossing it onto the tablecloth in front of Dante like he was tipping a valet. "There is $50 in it for you," Bradley said with a smirk. "Easy money." "Come on, look at those hands." He gestured vaguely at Dante's hands resting on the table. They were strong, capable hands. Yes, they had calluses from his obsessive rock climbing and the boxing gym he owned, but Bradley saw only what he wanted to see. He saw the hands of a laborer, the hands of someone beneath him. "Those are working hands," Bradley sneered. "Thick, rough. You look like you are used to manual labor. Hauling bricks, changing tires. You know your way around a steering wheel, right?" The racism was not even subtle. It was wrapped in a joke delivered with a smile, but it was as sharp as a razor. Otis said nothing. He just cut his steak, indifferent to the disrespect happening right in front of him. Dante picked up the $50 bill. He looked at it for a moment, then calmly folded it and slid it back across the table toward Bradley. "I am afraid I have to decline," Dante said, his voice smooth and deep, carrying a quiet authority that Bradley completely missed. "My hands are actually used to signing papers. Contracts, mergers, that sort of thing." For a second, Bradley looked confused. Then he threw his head back and let out a braying laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Signing papers." Bradley wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, that is rich. What kind of papers are you signing, buddy? Your unemployment checks." The table erupted. Chantel giggled behind her hand. Otis even cracked a smile, shaking his head as if Dante was a court jester performing for their amusement. Bradley looked around, beaming proud of his witticism. Dante did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He just smiled, a small, dangerous smile that did not reach his eyes. "Something like that," Dante said softly. I looked at my husband, the man who had just closed a $400 million acquisition deal that morning, being mocked by a man who was leasing a car he could barely afford. The urge to flip the table was overwhelming. But Dante's calm was infectious. He knew, and I knew, that the higher Bradley climbed on his pedestal of arrogance, the harder the fall would be, and we were about to kick the ladder out from under him. The laughter died down as the sommelier approached our table. He was a tall man with impeccable posture, holding the leather-bound wine list like it was a sacred text. He did not look at me or Dante. In this restaurant, the staff knew exactly who was paying the bill, or at least who pretended to be the most important. Otis snapped his fingers, beckoning the man closer. "We are celebrating greatness tonight," my father announced, his voice booming so the neighboring tables could hear. "I want the Chateau Margaux, the 2015 vintage, and do not bring me just one bottle. Bring 2. We have a thirst to quench." The sommelier raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the $10,000 order. "An excellent choice, sir. Shall I bring 6 glasses?" Otis frowned, looking around the table as if doing a head count. He pointed a thick finger at Chantel, then Bradley, then himself, and finally his late wife's empty chair, which he often toasted to for sympathy. Then his eyes landed on me. 4 glasses, Otis corrected him sharply. Just 4. He leaned across the table, his face twisting into a mask of faux paternal concern that barely hid his disdain. Simone, you stick to tap water tonight. This is a $5,000 bottle of wine. I am not going to pour liquid gold down the throat of someone who cannot tell the difference between a Bordeaux and grape juice. Besides, he added with a cruel chuckle, looking at my plain clothes, we would not want you getting used to a lifestyle you can never afford. Water is free. That fits your budget perfectly. Chantel let out a small, sharp laugh, covering her mouth with her napkin. Good point, Daddy. We do not want her to develop expensive tastes. She might start asking me for a raise before she even starts working as my accountant. I felt the air pressure drop beside me. Dante had shifted in his chair. His body was rigid, a coiled spring ready to snap. I knew that look. I knew that tension. Dante was a man of infinite patience, but insulting me was the one line nobody was allowed to cross. He knew that the wine cellar in our penthouse held bottles that would make this Chateau Margaux look like vinegar. He knew we could buy this entire restaurant and turn it into a parking lot by morning. Dante raised his hand, catching the sommelier's attention. The sommelier paused, looking at my husband, with a flicker of recognition that Otis completely missed. Excuse me, Dante said, his voice dangerously low. I saw his eyes scan the reserve list on the back of the menu. He was looking at the Domaine de la Romanée Conti. $25,000 a bottle. He was about to order it. He was about to order it just to pour it into my glass and watch my father's face crumble. It would be a power move. It would be an instant victory. But it was too soon. If he humiliated them now, they would just think he was irresponsible with money, or worse, that he had stolen it. I needed them to dig their graves deeper. I needed them to sign the papers. I needed total, absolute destruction, not just a moment of shock. I placed my hand over Dante's. I pressed my fingers into his palm, a silent command. Stop. Not yet. Dante looked at me. His dark eyes were burning with a protective fury that made my heart ache, but he saw the resolve in my face. He saw the long game. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his hand. Never mind, Dante said to the sommelier, his voice flat. Water will be fine. Otis smirked, mistaking Dante's restraint for submission. That is right, boy. Know your place. You drink what is given to you. Now let us drink to success. Something neither of you knows anything about. The waiter returned with the Chateau Margaux, presenting the label to my father with a ceremonial bow. Otis nodded, accepting the cork to inspect it, before waving his hand for the wine to be poured. The rich, dark red liquid filled 3 glasses, leaving mine and Dante's empty. The visual exclusion was stark, but my father was not done. He had taken away my inheritance, mocked my husband, and insulted my career. Now he was going to weaponize the one thing I held sacred. He turned his chair slightly to face the empty seat at the end of the table, the one that had been set for my mother Elizabeth. To Elizabeth, Otis said, his voice dropping to a somber, performative tone. She always dreamed of this day. She dreamed of seeing her children established, secure, respectable. It breaks my heart that she is not here to see Chantel finally taking her rightful place at the head of the family. I felt a lump form in my throat. My mother had been the only source of warmth in that cold house. She had been the one who secretly mailed me cookies during my first months at the startup, even when Otis forbade her from contacting me. She would be proud of all of us, Dad, I said quietly. Otis set his glass down with a sharp clatter. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly hard and bright with anger. Do not put words in her mouth, Simone. Your mother died of a broken heart, and we both know who broke it. The accusation hit me like a physical slap. The table went deadly silent. Even Bradley stopped chewing his steak. Excuse me, I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain still. You heard me, Otis hissed. The stress killed her. The shame killed her. Do you remember the night you came home and told us you were quitting school? You had a full scholarship to Harvard Law. You were the golden ticket, and you threw it in the trash to go play with codes and circuits. I did not quit, I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. I left to build something. Mom knew that. She understood. She lied for you. Otis shouted, not caring who stared. She was so ashamed that she told her church group you were studying abroad in London. She could not bear to tell her friends that her daughter was a dropout. A quitter. She spent her final years worrying if you were going to end up homeless. That worry ate her alive, Simone. So do not sit there and tell me she was proud. She died disappointed. I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was a rewrite of history so vile, so completely detached from reality, that I almost couldn't process it. My mother knew I left Harvard because I had secured my first round of venture capital. She knew I was building Aura Health. She had held my hand in the hospital 2 days before she died and told me, keep going, baby girl. Show them what you are made of. But Otis did not know that. He only knew what fit his narrative. To him, I was the villain who killed his wife with mediocrity. I felt Dante's hand grip my knee under the table hard. It was the only thing keeping me in my seat. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that the stress that killed Mom was his controlling nature, his demands, his refusal to let her live her own life. But I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. You are wrong, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But I will let you believe that. For now. Otis scoffed, picking up his wineglass again. I do not need your permission to believe the truth. Now silence. Chantel has a gift for me. Let us focus on the child who actually loved her parents. The tension regarding my mother's memory hung in the air for exactly 10 seconds before Chantel decided she had been out of the spotlight for too long. She reached under her chair and pulled out a midnight blue velvet box, placing it on the table with the reverence one would accord a religious artifact. Daddy, I know you are upset, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. But I wanted to give you this now. A token of appreciation for everything you have done for me, for trusting me with the family legacy. Otis wiped his mouth with his napkin, his mood instantly shifting from anger to anticipation. He took the box in his large hands. The logo on the top was unmistakable. You did not. Otis breathed. Open it, Chantel urged, clasping her hands together. He lifted the lid. Inside sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold. It was heavy, shiny, and to the untrained eye it screamed wealth. My father gasped, his eyes widening. He carefully lifted the watch from its cushion, holding it up to the light. The diamonds on the bezel sparkled aggressively. Chantel, this is incredible, he stammered. This must have cost a fortune. Bradley leaned back, swirling his scotch again, looking incredibly pleased with himself. That is not just a watch, Otis. That is a statement. Chantel had to fly all the way to Milan last week to secure that specific model. We had to pull some serious strings with a dealer I know. It set us back $80,000. But for the patriarch of the Brooks family, it is worth every penny. $80,000, Otis repeated reverently, fastening the clasp around his wrist. He turned his arm, admiring the way it caught the light. Now this is a retirement gift. This is class. I leaned in slightly. From where I sat, the overhead light hit the crystal face perfectly. My years of negotiating deals with Swiss bankers and attending high-end galas had taught me a thing or two about horology. I knew exactly what a real Nautilus looked like. I knew the weight, the finish, and most importantly, the movement. A real Patek Philippe movement is a masterpiece of engineering. The second hand glides. It sweeps across the face with a fluid, almost hypnotic motion. But as I stared at the watch on my father's wrist, I saw it. The second hand ticked. It was a subtle, stuttering motion, distinct and rhythmic. Tick, tick, tick. It was a quartz movement inside a mechanical shell, a replica. A very high-quality replica likely purchased for $500 in a back alley, not $80,000 in Milan. I felt Dante stiffen beside me. He had seen it too. He looked at me, his eyebrow raised in a silent question. Should we say something? Should we expose the lie right now and watch Bradley crumble? I shook my head imperceptibly. No, not yet. If I spoke up now, they would just call me jealous. They would say I was trying to ruin the moment because I could not afford a gift of that magnitude. It was better to let them dig the hole deeper. Bradley had just claimed he spent 80 grand on a fake watch. That meant he had either pocketed the difference or more likely he did not have the money to begin with. Otis held his wrist up toward me, a sneer forming on his lips. Look closely, Simone. Take a good look. This is what success looks like. Maybe if you work hard enough selling your little computer programs in 20 years, you might be able to afford the strap. But I doubt it. I smiled a cold, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. It is certainly a unique piece, Dad, I said. I have never seen one quite like it. Bradley preened, taking the compliment at face value. You won't see another one, Simone. That is custom, one of a kind. He had no idea how right he was. I took a sip of my water, savoring the anticipation. The receipt for that watch was going to be very interesting when the auditors finally looked at it. I waited for the oohs and ahs over the fake watch to subside before I made my move. There was no velvet box in my hand, no flashy wrapping paper, just a simple, crisp white envelope. I had spent hours debating whether to give it to him. Part of me knew he did not deserve it. But another part, the part that still craved a father's approval against all logic, wanted to save him from his own financial incompetence. Inside that envelope was a document granting him stock options in Aura Health. Current market value $500,000. It was enough to secure his retirement for real, not just the fantasy version he was acting out tonight. Happy retirement, Dad, I said, sliding the envelope across the tablecloth. It is not jewelry, but I think you will find it useful. Before Otis could even reach for it, Chantel's hand darted out like a viper. She snatched the envelope, her long acrylic nails tearing the flap open with zero hesitation. She pulled out the single sheet of paper, squinting at the lines of alphanumeric codes and legal text. What is this? She laughed, waving the paper in the air. Did you print out a coupon code for us? Is this for 50% off at the grocery store? Bradley leaned over, glancing at the document without understanding a word of it. Looks like some kind of crypto nonsense, he sneered. Or maybe it is a star registry certificate. Did you name a star after him, Simone? How cute. It is an investment portfolio transfer. I said, my voice steady. Otis did not even look at the paper. He looked at me, his face twisting with irritation. He was wearing a fake watch that he thought was worth a luxury car, and his disappointment daughter had handed him a piece of paper. To a man like Otis, wealth had to be heavy. It had to shine. If you could not wear it or drive it, it was not real. He snatched the paper from Chantel's hand. He did not read the header. He did not see the authorized signature of the CFO. He just saw paper. I told you, Simone Otis grunted. I am done with your games. I am done with your imaginary money and your computer schemes. I need real assets. I need things that hold value. He crumpled the document in his fist. Then, with a casual cruelty that made my breath hitch, he tossed the ball of paper onto his dinner plate. It landed right in the middle of the leftover peppercorn sauce and steak grease. The white paper immediately began to soak up the brown oil, turning translucent. Dad, I said, my voice rising slightly. That is not trash. It is to me, Otis replied, picking up his fork and stabbing a potato wedge right next to the ruined document. I need cash, Simone. I need liquidity. Not trash, not promises. Now let us move on to something that actually matters. Bradley tells me he has a business proposition that will double the family fortune in 6 months. Now that is a gift. I stared at the oily ball of paper. He had just thrown away $500,000. He had thrown away his safety net, and he did it to listen to a man who was about to rob him blind. I looked at Dante. He was staring at the plate too, his expression unreadable, but I knew what he was thinking. We had tried. We had genuinely tried to throw him a lifeline, and he had spat on it. I leaned back in my chair, the fight leaving me. Fine, Dad, I thought. You want to bet on Bradley? Then you can suffer the consequences. I just hoped he enjoyed the taste of that steak because it was the most expensive meal he would ever eat. Dante stared at the grease-stained paper on Otis's plate. The silence that followed my father's rejection was heavy, but this time my husband did not squeeze my hand to signal patience. He let go. He placed his hands flat on the table, pushing his chair back with a scrape that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. Enough, Dante said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that stopped the waiter from refilling the water glasses. Otis blinked, looking at Dante, as if a piece of furniture had just started speaking. "Excuse me?" Otis asked, his brow furrowing. "Did the driver just speak?" Dante ignored the insult. He pointed a steady finger at the crumpled ball of paper. "You just threw away $500,000, Otis. But I suppose that is a habit of yours. Throwing away the things Simone gives you. Just like you threw away the truth about your heart surgery last winter." The room went deadly silent. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The air conditioner hummed in the background, amplifying the sudden tension. Then, as if on cue, Bradley let out a snort and the dam broke. The table erupted into raucous, mocking laughter. It was an ugly sound, fueled by wine and arrogance. Otis laughed the hardest, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, this is rich," he wheezed. "This is truly entertaining. You think Simone paid for my triple bypass?" "Simone? She cannot even pay for her own parking tickets." Otis turned to me, his face red with mirth. "Is this what you tell him, Simone? To make yourself feel important? You lie to your husband about having money. That is pathetic, even for you." That $200,000 came from Chantel. It was the proceeds from her debut fashion collection. She sold out her entire inventory in 3 days just to save her father. That is what a real daughter does. She sacrifices for family. I looked at Chantel. She was sipping her wine a little too quickly, her eyes refusing to meet mine. The collection Otis was referring to consisted of 50 t-shirts she had printed with a stolen logo. They were still sitting in boxes in her basement. I knew because I had seen them when I went over to help her set up her printer. But the money had come from a direct wire transfer from my personal account to the hospital billing department. I had paid it anonymously because I knew Otis would refuse it if he knew it came from me. I had let Chantel take the credit because I wanted my father to have peace of mind during his recovery. I never thought she would weaponize that kindness against me. Dante was not laughing. He looked at Chantel with cold, clinical precision. "Chantel," Dante said softly, "tell him. Tell him right now whose name was on that wire transfer." Chantel set her glass down hard. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and defensive. "Stop trying to steal my credit. Daddy, make them stop. They are just jealous because my business is booming and they have nothing." Otis slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Silence. I will not have you harass your sister." I saw the check. I saw the love in her eyes. "You two are delusional. Absolutely delusional. Now sit down and shut up or get out." Otis returned to his meal with an aggressive clatter of silverware, his chest still heaving from his outburst. He stabbed at his potatoes as if he were stabbing at the inconvenient truth Dante had just tried to present. The rest of the table followed his lead, heads down, terrified to ignite another explosion. But I did not look down. I kept my eyes fixed on Chantel. She felt my gaze. She paused with her wineglass halfway to her lips, and for a fleeting second I saw a flash of annoyance cross her perfectly made-up face. She set the glass down and turned to me, arching a sculpted eyebrow, as if asking what I was going to do about it. "Is that what you told him?" I asked, my voice low and steady, cutting under the noise of the restaurant clatter. "Did you really look him in the eye and tell him that my money was yours?" Chantel did not flinch. She did not blush. She did not look at her plate in shame. Instead, she smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile that showed just how deeply her delusion ran. She leaned across the table, invading my personal space, her perfume thick and cloying. She lowered her voice to a whisper, intimate and cruel, ensuring that our father could not hear us over the sound of his own chewing. "Of course I did," she hissed. "And why shouldn't I look at you, Simone? Look at your life. You are a ghost. You exist in the margins." I stared at her, stunned by the absolute lack of morality. "You stole $200,000 of credit, Chantel. That is fraud. That is pathological." Chantel laughed softly, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, grow up. Nobody cares about the technicalities. Daddy needed a hero and I gave him one. I look the part. I act the part. I am the daughter he wants to brag about at the country club. You are just the cautionary tale." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes dancing with malice. Who is he going to believe, Simone? Think about it. Really think about it. I am the successful fashion mogul in his eyes. You are the unemployed dropout who married a driver. Even if you showed him the bank statements right now, he would just say you forged them. He wants to believe in me. I am the star of this movie. You are just the extra. You are the background scenery that exists to make me shine brighter, so stop trying to steal my spotlight and just eat your free dinner. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs. It was not just a lie to her. It was a world view. In Chantel's mind, I was not a person with feelings or rights. I was a prop. I was an NPC in the video game of her life, existing solely to be used or discarded depending on what the plot required. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my money, my credit, and my dignity because she was the golden child. I looked at Dante. He had heard every word. His hand was resting on the table and his knuckles were white. But his face was calm. It was the calm of a predator watching its prey walk into a trap. "Let her shine," Dante murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "Stars burn out. And when they do, they leave nothing but a black hole." I nodded, picking up my water glass. "You are right, Chantel," I said, raising my voice slightly so Otis would look up. "You are the star. I hope you are ready for the attention that comes with it, because tonight is going to be very illuminating for you." Chantel smirked, mistaking my warning for surrender. "I was born ready, sweetie. Now hush. Bradley is about to make Daddy richer." Bradley leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a sleek, cream-colored business card, flicking it onto the table with a practiced motion. It spun and landed in front of Otis, who looked down at it as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "That is where the magic happens," Otis Bradley declared, his chest puffed out. "Stratton and Oakmont, Wall Street. I do not just play with money. I move it. I make it grow. Real assets, real commodities, not whatever it is you do." He turned his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing as he tried to recall the name of my company. "What is it called again?" "Aura Health?" "Yes, Aura Health," I replied, keeping my face impassive. Bradley snorted, shaking his head. "Aura Health. God, it sounds like one of those pyramid schemes where suburban moms sell essential oils and leggings out of their garage. What do you actually do? Sell vitamins? Convince people that crystals cure cancer?" The table erupted in laughter again. Otis slapped his knee, clearly delighted by the comparison. "That is exactly what I told her, Bradley. It sounds like a scam. A absolute scam. It is a data analytics platform for hospitals," I said, my voice cutting through their mirth. "We use artificial intelligence to optimize patient flow and reduce administrative errors." Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "Buzzwords. Just a bunch of tech buzzwords to hide the fact that you are unemployed. Listen, Simone, let me give you some advice from someone who actually understands the economy. Tech bubbles burst. But gold, oil, real estate, that is where the power is." He took a sip of his scotch, looking at me with genuine pity. "It is embarrassing, honestly, telling people you are a CEO of a company nobody has ever heard of. I bet your office is your living room couch, isn't it? Actually, our headquarters is in the Loop, I said. We occupy the top 3 floors of the Zenith Tower. Bradley choked on his drink. He coughed, slamming his glass down, liquid splashing onto the tablecloth. The Zenith Tower? He wheezed, wiping his mouth. You expect us to believe you have an office in the most expensive building in Chicago? Please. You probably rent a mailbox in the lobby. He turned to Otis, his face red from coughing and laughter. Do you hear this, Otis? She is delusional. She is actually trying to convince us she is a player. Otis shook his head, looking at me with deep disappointment. Stop lying, Simone. It is unbecoming. Just admit you are struggling. Just admit you made a mistake leaving law school. We would respect you more if you just admitted you were a failure instead of inventing these fantasies. I looked at Dante. He was staring at Bradley with a look of pure predatory amusement. He knew that the Zenith Tower was not just where my office was. He knew that the holding company listed on the building's deed was mine. We did not just rent the top 3 floors, we owned the building. But Bradley, the self-proclaimed Wall Street genius, had not done his due diligence. Whatever you say, Bradley, I said, picking up my water glass. I am sure your knowledge of the market is extensive. Extensive, Bradley scoffed. It is elite, which is why I am about to offer your father the deal of a lifetime. A deal that requires real capital, not imaginary computer money. Bradley did not waste a second. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a document that looked far more official than the fake watch on my father's wrist. It was thick-bound in a blue folder and stamped with words like urgent and confidential. He slid it across the table, right over the grease stain where my stock transfer form had landed. Here is the situation, Otis Bradley said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. My firm has an exclusive opening in the Helios Fund. It is usually reserved for institutional investors, people with 8 figures or more. But because I am the lead broker, I can squeeze one family member in. Just one. Otis looked at the folder, his eyes wide with greed. What is the return conservative estimate, 20% a month? Bradley lied without blinking. Aggressive estimate. You double your principal in 90 days, but here is the catch. The buy-in window closes at midnight tonight. We need $500,000. Liquid. My father swallowed hard. He was a lawyer, but he was not a wealthy man by liquid standards. He lived a life of high credit limits and appearances. He did not have $500,000 sitting in a checking account. I do not have that kind of cash on hand. Bradley. Otis admitted, his voice tight. You know the firm has been slow this year. I know, Bradley said smoothly. That is why I prepared this. He flipped the folder open to the last page. It was a lien agreement. A home equity line of credit secured against the Hyde Park estate. The house was the only thing of real value Otis actually owned outright. It was worth $3 million mortgage-free. Just sign here, Bradley said, uncapping a gold fountain pen. We use the house as collateral to secure the loan. We dump the cash into the fund. In 3 months, we pay off the loan with the profits and you pocket $500,000 for doing absolutely nothing. It is free money, Otis. Otis hesitated. He looked at the pen, then at the document. The Hyde Park house was his castle. It was the physical proof that he was better than the people he grew up with. To risk it was terrifying even for a gambler like him. This is the family seat, Bradley Otis muttered, his hand trembling slightly. If something goes wrong, if the market turns... Bradley leaned back, looking offended. If Otis, look at who is talking to you. I am not some street hustler. I am family. Are you saying you do not trust me? Chantel jumped in immediately, sensing her husband was losing his grip on the prey. She placed her hand over Otis's hand, looking deep into his eyes with that practiced adoration. Daddy, please, she begged. Bradley is doing this for us. He is risking his reputation at the firm to get you this deal. Do you really think he would let anything happen to my inheritance? He loves me. He loves you. She glanced at me, then back at Otis. Or are you going to let fear make your decisions? Do not be like Simone Daddy. Do not be afraid of success. Bradley is a financial genius. He is offering to double your net worth, and you are worrying about a house. Otis looked at Chantel, his golden child, his reflection. He saw the fake Patek on his wrist. He saw the expensive wine. He wanted to believe that this was his reality. He wanted to believe that he was a tycoon making power moves, not an old man being swindled by his son-in-law. You are right, Otis breathed, taking the pen. You are right, sweetheart. Scared money makes no money. He hovered the pen over the signature line. The trap was set, the bait was taken. He was about to sign away his life, and he thought he was signing a winning ticket. The gold nib of the fountain pen hovered millimeters above the signature line. My father was seconds away from signing over the deed to the Hyde Park estate, the only tangible memory I had left of my mother. I could not let him do it. I could not sit there and watch him immolate his future just to feed Bradley's greed. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto the letterhead at the top of the document. Helios Capital Partners. The name triggered an immediate red flag in my mind. Just 3 days ago, my chief legal officer had sent a memo warning our executive team about this exact entity. It was not an exclusive fund. It was a house of cards that was currently being dismantled by federal regulators. Dad, stop, I said, my voice sharp and commanding. Do not sign that paper. Otis froze the pen, creating a small ink blot on the page. He looked up, his face darkening with instant irritation. Bradley let out an exaggerated sigh, throwing his hands up in the air. Here we go, Bradley groaned. The financial expert speaks. What is it now, Simone? Is the font not to your liking? That fund is under investigation by the SEC, I said, staring directly at my father. Helios Capital is a Ponzi scheme. They freeze assets upon entry and pay out fake returns using new investor capital. There was a subpoena issued on Monday. If you sign that you are not investing, you are donating your house to a criminal enterprise that is about to be raided. For a split second, I saw fear flicker in Otis's eyes. He pulled the pen back slightly, looking at Bradley for reassurance. The accusation was specific enough to sound real. But Bradley was a master manipulator. He did not get angry. Instead, he laughed. He laughed with a pitying shake of his head that made me look like the crazy one. Oh, honey, Bradley chuckled. You really have been reading too many conspiracy blogs. The SEC. Really, I had lunch with the fund manager yesterday. Does this look like a criminal enterprise to you? He gestured to his expensive suit and the restaurant around us, as if his presence alone was proof of legitimacy. Otis looked from Bradley to me. He had a choice. He could believe the daughter who dealt in hard data, or he could believe the son-in-law who promised him easy millions. He looked at my plain clothes. He looked at Dante's silence. Then he looked at the flashing diamonds on Chantel's fingers. The choice was made. You are pathetic. Otis spat the venom in his voice, startling even the waiter nearby. I am trying to save you, I insisted. No, you are trying to sabotage me, Otis shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You cannot stand it, can you? You cannot stand seeing your sister and her husband succeed. You are so consumed by your own mediocrity that you have to invent lies to drag us down. You want me to be poor. You want me to be destitute so you can feel better about your own failures. Dad, that is not true, I said, my voice breaking slightly. It is exactly true, Otis cut me off. You are jealous. You are bitter. And you are a liar. I am not going to let your envy cost me this opportunity. I am done listening to you. He looked down at the paper, his resolve hardened by spite. He wanted to prove me wrong more than he wanted to be rich. He pressed the pen to the paper, the scratching sound of his signature sealing his fate. I watched in horror as he signed away his home, his legacy, and his dignity, all to spite the only person in the room who actually gave a damn about him. The sound of the gold nib scratching against the paper was aggressive, loud, and final. Otis did not just sign his name, he carved it. He pressed down with such force that I could see the indentation on the back of the page as he flipped it over. He signed the loan agreement and the power of attorney. With every stroke of the pen, he was dismantling 40 years of hard work. He was handing over the keys to the kingdom to a man who would pawn the crown jewels before the ink was even dry. When he finished, Otis did not hand the pen back to Bradley. Instead, he held it up staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. The hatred in his eyes was not because I had done anything wrong. It was because I had dared to be right when he wanted to be blind. "You see this, Simone?" Otis barked, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "This is what family does. We trust each other. We take risks for each other. We do not sit on the sidelines throwing stones." Then, with a sudden violent motion, he hurled the heavy fountain pen across the table. It spun through the air and struck me hard on the collarbone before clattering onto the floor. I flinched not from the pain, but from the sheer shock of the violence. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. A waiter dropped a fork in the distance. "See that?" Otis shouted, ignoring the gasps from nearby tables. "That is what I think of your advice. I would rather lose everything, do you hear me? I would rather lose every single dime I have and live in a gutter than listen to a word coming out of your jealous, spiteful mouth. At least Bradley has guts. At least Chantel has vision. You have nothing but bitterness." Bradley snatched the blue folder off the table as if he were afraid I might try to set it on fire. He quickly checked the signatures, a greedy smile spreading across his face like a stain. He tucked the folder back into his briefcase and snapped the lock shut. The sound echoed like a prison cell closing. "You made the right choice," Otis Bradley said, patting my father on the shoulder. "Ignore the noise. The winner's circle is always lonely. You just secured your legacy." Chantel beamed, reaching over to squeeze Otis's hand. "I am so proud of you, Daddy. You showed her. You really showed her." I sat there rubbing the sore spot on my collarbone. My heart was pounding, but strangely the fear was gone, the sadness was gone. Otis had made his choice. He had explicitly stated he preferred ruin over my help. I had done my duty as a daughter. I had warned him. I had offered him a lifeline. I had tried to stop the bleeding. He had responded with assault and insults. I felt a vibration against my thigh. I glanced down. Dante had his phone in his lap, concealed by the tablecloth. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Bradley, his expression detached and clinical like a coroner examining a corpse. My phone buzzed again. I looked down at the screen. It was a message from Dante. It was short, brutal, and exactly what I needed to see. Plan A failed. Assets secured. Deploying Plan B. I looked up at my husband. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The time for mercy was over. If Otis wanted to lose everything to learn a lesson, we were going to give him exactly what he asked for. But we were going to make sure Bradley and Chantel went down with the ship. The rescue mission was aborted. The demolition was about to begin. With the folder safely tucked away in his briefcase, Bradley transformed. He was no longer just the son-in-law begging for an investment. He was now the gatekeeper to a kingdom my father desperately wanted to enter. He checked his phone, then adjusted his tie, leaning back with a smug expression that suggested he held the keys to the universe. "By the way," Otis Bradley said, signaling the waiter for another round of scotch, "there is another reason I needed you to sign that quickly. The buy-in window is tight, because the principal investor is on his way here right now. He likes to vet the new capital personally." Otis looked around the restaurant nervously. "Who is it?" "Someone from the bank." Bradley laughed, shaking his head. "The bank number. Banks are for little people. I am talking about the whale. The man behind the curtain." He paused for dramatic effect, lowering his voice. "The majority stakeholder in the Helios Fund is the CEO of Aura Health." I choked on my water. I had to press the napkin to my lips to stifle the cough, but it was not a cough of surprise. It was a cough of suppressed hysteria. I felt the liquid burn the back of my throat as I fought to keep a straight face. Otis looked at me with disgust. Try to have some decorum, Simone. We are discussing business. I nodded, waving a hand to apologize, my eyes watering. I took another sip of water, terrified that if I spoke I would burst out laughing. Bradley was sitting there claiming that the primary investor in his Ponzi scheme was the CEO of Aura Health. He was claiming that his partner was me. "You know the CEO of Aura Health, Otis?" asked, his voice hushed with reverence. "That company was on the cover of Forbes last month." "Know him," Bradley smirked. "We go way back. We play racquetball at the Union League Club every Tuesday. Great guy. Tough as nails, though. He is a shark. He eats weaklings for breakfast. But he respects me. He trusts my judgment. That is why he let me bring you in on this deal." I looked at Dante. He was staring at the ceiling, biting the inside of his cheek. I knew exactly what he was thinking. I hate racquetball. I have never been to the Union League Club. And I certainly do not respect Bradley. The fabrication was so detailed, so confident that it was almost impressive. Bradley had invented an entire friendship with a fictional male version of me. "He is coming here?" Otis asked, straightening his tie. "Tonight? Any minute now," Bradley promised, checking his fake Patek Philippe again. "And do not worry, Otis. I will introduce you. I have already told him all about you. I told him you are a man of vision. If you play your cards right, he might even invite you to the gala next weekend." Otis looked like a child who had just been promised a trip to Disney World. He smoothed his hair, looking at his reflection in the spoon. "Thank you, Bradley. This is a huge honor." I took another long sip of water, letting the cool liquid settle my nerves. The level of delusion at the table had reached critical mass. Bradley was waiting for a fictional man to walk through the door and validate his lies. He had no idea that the shark he was talking about, the shark that ate weaklings for breakfast, was sitting 3 feet away from him, wearing a $2,000 t-shirt and holding a glass of tap water. The trap was not just set, it was sealed, and Bradley had just locked himself inside it. The vibration of my father's cell phone against the mahogany table cut through the conversation like a drill. It was a sharp, persistent buzzing that demanded immediate attention. Otis stopped mid-sentence, his hand darting out to grab the device. He held it up, squinting at the screen through his reading glasses, his breath hitching in his throat. It was the notification he had been waiting for, the digital confirmation that would seal his fate. "It is done," Otis whispered, looking up at us with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "The bank just authorized the wire. $500,000. It has been transferred to Helios Capital." Bradley checked his own phone under the table. I saw the reflection of the screen in his Scotch glass. A green checkmark appeared. The money had landed. The trap had snapped shut. He looked up, his face breaking into a wide, predatory grin that he tried to disguise as a smile of congratulations. "Welcome to the big leagues," Otis Bradley said, raising his glass. "You just made the smartest decision of your life. By tomorrow morning, that money starts working for you. You are going to be seeing returns that will make your law partner's pension look like pocket change." He shot a quick, subtle wink at Chantel. It was a signal between thieves. "We got him. We got the house." Chantel let out a squeal of delight, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Daddy, I am so excited. We are going to be so rich." She turned around in her chair, snapping her fingers aggressively to summon the waiter. The poor man rushed over, sensing the manic energy radiating from our table. "Garçon," Chantel shouted, though we were in a steakhouse in Chicago, not a bistro in Paris. "Bring us the dessert menu. Actually, do not bother with the menu. We want the Grand Sultan sundae, the one with the edible 24-karat gold leaf." The waiter hesitated. "Ma'am, that sundae is $1,000. Chantel laughed, tossing her hair back. "Did I ask for the price? My father just made $1 million investment. We are celebrating. Bring 2 of them. One for me and one for my husband. Daddy, do you want one?" Otis shook his head, looking a little pale now that the adrenaline was fading. "No, just coffee for me." Chantel turned her eyes to me, her lips curling into a sneer. "And nothing for her. Unless you have a budget menu, maybe a scoop of vanilla in a paper cup. We do not want to stretch her wallet." I sat there watching them. They were celebrating a robbery. My father had just liquidated his home equity, the safety net he had built over 40 years, and handed it to a man who was likely using it to pay off gambling debts or flee the country. And Chantel was ordering gold to eat. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I looked at the time on my phone. The transaction was cleared. The money was gone. But that meant the crime was committed. Bradley had just crossed the line from attempted fraud to actual grand larceny. "Enjoy your dessert, Chantel," I said, my voice calm. "Eat every bite. It is the most expensive thing you will ever taste." Chantel giggled, grabbing Bradley's hand. "Oh, I will. And it will taste even sweeter knowing you are watching." Dante shifted beside me. He had seen the bank notification too. He knew the timeline. He tapped his finger against his water glass, a rhythmic countdown. The money was gone, which meant the investigation could officially begin. The trap was not just for Otis anymore. It was closing in on everyone. Otis sat back, satisfied, the adrenaline of the transaction slowly replaced by the heavy lethargy of a man who believes he has just won the lottery. He looked around the table at the empty wine glasses and the remnants of the meal. Then his gaze landed on me and Dante. The look of triumph on his face curdled into irritation. It was as if he had just realized that the help was still lingering in the room after the party was over. "Well, that is settled then," Otis announced, waving his hand at us in a shooing motion. "The business is concluded, the future is secured. Now do me a favor. Leave." I blinked, the sudden dismissal stinging despite everything. "You want us to go?" "Yes, I want you to go," Otis snapped. "Look at you. You are sitting there like two dark clouds hovering over my sunny day. Your jealousy is palpable, Simone. It is bringing down the mood. Chantel and I have things to discuss. Important things regarding the estate renovation. Things that do not concern disinherited children. So please take your husband and your negativity and get out of my sight." It was the final discard. He had taken my money in the past, he had taken my dignity tonight, and now that he felt secure with his new fake fortune, he was tossing me out like a used napkin. I reached for my purse. The conditioning ran deep. For 30 years, when Otis commanded, I obeyed mostly to avoid the screaming that would follow if I resisted. I started to push my chair back, ready to retreat to the safety of the cool night air. "Sit down." The voice was low, deep, and immovable. It did not come from my father. It came from the man beside me. Dante's hand clamped over my wrist, gentle but firm, anchoring me to the spot. He was not looking at me. He was staring straight at Otis. I froze. I looked at Dante, confused. He never disobeyed my father directly. He usually just endured it for my sake. "Dante," I whispered. "We are not going anywhere." Dante said, his voice rising just enough to carry across the table. Otis dropped his napkin. He stared at Dante with genuine baffle, as if a golden retriever had just stood up and started reciting Shakespeare. "Excuse me," Otis sputtered. "Did you just tell me no?" "In my own celebratory dinner. I said we are not leaving," Dante repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Not yet." Bradley laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Oh, look at this." The driver found a spine. "What are you going to do?" "Big guy, order another glass of tap water. Do us all a favor and beat it before Otis calls security. You are embarrassing yourself." "We cannot leave," Dante said, ignoring Bradley completely. "We are waiting for someone." "Waiting for someone?" Chantel scoffed, licking a flake of gold leaf from her spoon. "Who could you possibly be waiting for? Your parole officer? Or maybe the tow truck driver coming to collect that rust bucket you drove here?" "We are waiting for our staff," Dante said calmly. The table went silent for a heartbeat before exploding into laughter again. Even the sommelier nearby had to turn away to hide a smile. "Staff?" Otis wheezed, his face turning red. "You have staff. What, did you hire a babysitter for your cat? Or is that what you call the guy who mows the lawn at your rental complex?" Bradley wiped a tear from his eye. Oh, this is priceless. Please let them stay, Otis. I have to see this. I have to see the imaginary staff of the king and queen of nothing. This is better than a comedy show. Dante did not smile. He checked his watch, a precise, calculated movement. Laugh while you can, Otis, Dante said. Because when they get here, the joke is going to be on you. And I promise you are not going to find it funny. Chantel looked at Dante, her mouth hanging open for a split second before she burst into fresh laughter. It was a loud, ugly sound that drew the attention of the entire dining room. She leaned forward, pointing a manicured finger at my husband's chest. Staff, she repeated, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. Did you hear that, Bradley? He is waiting for his staff. What kind of staff could you possibly have? Dante, did you order a pizza? Is the delivery boy your staff? Or maybe you mean the tow truck driver is coming to haul your junk car away and you call him your chauffeur? The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. People at the surrounding tables stopped eating. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. To them, we were exactly what my family said we were: intruders. Unwashed, unwanted guests crashing a high society celebration. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck, not from shame but from the sheer weight of the isolation. In that moment, I was not a CEO. I was not a billionaire. I was just the little girl who was never good enough to sit at the big table. Bradley joined in, shaking his head with mock sympathy. It is sad, really. Delusions of grandeur are a serious symptom. Maybe we should call an ambulance instead of security. They clearly need professional help. Otis had turned a deep shade of purple. His retirement dinner, his moment of glory, was being hijacked by what he perceived as a circus act performed by his failures of children. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Enough, Otis roared. I have had enough of this charade. You are making a mockery of this family. He turned around in his chair and snapped his fingers aggressively at the maitre d', a tall, imposing man named Mr. Sterling, who had been watching the commotion from the hostess stand. Manager Otis shouted, "Over here!" Immediately, Mr. Sterling straightened his jacket and began to walk toward our table. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his stride was purposeful. Otis sat back, crossing his arms, a look of smug satisfaction settling on his face. You wanted to wait? Otis hissed at us. Well, now you can wait on the curb. I am having you removed for trespassing and harassment. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. Do not blame me, Simone. You brought this on yourself. You could have just stayed away. You could have just let us be happy. But no, you had to come here and spoil it with your jealousy. Well, now you are going to be humiliated in front of the entire city. I looked at Dante. He was not looking at Otis. He was looking past my father's shoulder, watching Mr. Sterling approach. Dante's face was perfectly calm. He took a sip of water, set the glass down gently, and adjusted his cuffs. Here he comes, Dante said softly. Otis sneered. Yes, here he comes. To throw you out? I hope you enjoy the walk home. The maitre d' arrived at the table. He stopped right between Otis and Dante. Otis looked up at him, pointing a trembling finger at us. These two are bothering my guests, Otis declared, using his courtroom voice. They are refusing to leave private property. I want them escorted out immediately. If they resist, call the police. I will press charges. Otis looked at us, waiting for the fear to set in. He expected us to beg. He expected us to apologize. He expected the manager to grab Dante by the collar and drag him away. He was waiting for his victory lap. Mr. Sterling stopped at the edge of our table, his presence commanding immediate silence from the surrounding diners. He was a man who radiated authority, dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Bradley's car. He looked down at the scene, taking in the spilled wine, the half-eaten food, and my father's purple, angry face. Finally, Otis said, exhaling sharply, You took your time. I want these two removed immediately. They are disrupting my dinner. They are harassing my guests. And frankly, they look like they wandered in from a homeless shelter. Otis gestured vaguely at Dante and me, his hand waving as if he were shooing away flies. I demand you escort them off the premises. If they refuse, call the police. I am sure you have a policy against vagrants loitering in a fine dining establishment. Mr. Sterling did not move. He did not signal for security. Instead, a look of profound confusion crossed his face. He blinked, shifting his gaze from my father's frantic, sweating face to Dante, who was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting calmly on the tablecloth. The manager's eyes widened slightly. It was a subtle reaction, but to anyone paying attention, it was the look of a man realizing he was standing next to a dormant volcano. He looked at the cheap watch on Bradley's wrist, the spilled sauce on the table, and then back to Dante. The recognition was instant. Otis, however, misinterpreted the silence. He thought the manager was just stunned by our audacity. "Well," Otis barked, "what are you waiting for? Do your job. Get them out." Mr. Sterling ignored my father completely. He turned his body, turning his back on Otis, and faced Dante. He bowed. It was not a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a deep, respectful bow from the waist, the kind reserved for royalty or heads of state. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," the manager said, his voice smooth and deferential. "I must apologize for the delay. We were not expecting you to dine in the main hall tonight. Your usual private suite has been prepared and is waiting for you should you wish to move to a quieter environment. We have also decanted the 1945 Romani Conti, just as you prefer." The silence that followed was heavy. Otis froze. His mouth, which had been open to shout another command, stayed open. He looked at the manager, then at Dante, and then a slow, smug smile spread across his face. He heard Mr. Brooks, he heard private suite, he heard deference, and in his supreme narcissism, he assumed it was all for him. "Thank you," Otis said, buttoning his jacket and standing up taller. "It is about time someone showed some respect to the Brooks name. I appreciate the upgrade. The main hall is indeed too noisy, especially with this riffraff hanging around. We will take the suite. Come along, Chantel. Come along, Bradley." It seems management finally realized who they are dealing with. Otis stepped forward, ready to follow Mr. Sterling, assuming the red carpet was being rolled out for his retirement. He did not even consider, not for a second, that the man bowing was not looking at him. Otis stood up, smoothing the front of his suit jacket with a satisfied grunt. He looked around the room, making sure the neighboring tables were witnessing his vindication. In his mind, the universe had finally corrected itself. The manager had bowed, the private suite was offered, and the natural order was restored. He believed his gray hair and his loud voice commanded authority, unaware that he was simply the loudest fool in the room. "Excellent," Otis said, nodding at Mr. Sterling. "I am glad to see standards still exist in this city. We will take the suite. But first you have a job to do." He pointed a thick finger at Dante, his face twisting into a grimace of absolute disgust. "Remove these people," Otis commanded, his voice loud and imperious. "They are trespassing. They are disturbing the peace. And frankly, they are an eyesore. I am trying to enjoy my retirement dinner, and I do not want to look at failures. Get them out of my sight, immediately." Otis turned to Chantel and Bradley, gesturing for them to gather their things. "Come along. We are moving up in the world. Leave the riffraff to the security team." Mr. Sterling did not move. He did not signal for security. He did not step aside to let Otis pass. Instead, a look of profound professional confusion washed over his face. He looked at Otis as if my father were speaking a foreign language. Then he looked at Dante, who was still sitting calmly, swirling the water in his glass. "I beg your pardon, sir?" Mr. Sterling asked, his tone polite but firm. "I said get them out," Otis snapped, losing patience. "Are you deaf? I am Mr. Brooks. I am the VIP guest you just addressed. Now do your job and escort these vagrants to the curb before I call the owner and have you fired." Mr. Sterling blinked. The confusion on his face cleared, replaced by a sudden sharp realization of the error. He stiffened, his posture becoming even more rigid. He looked at Otis with a pitying expression, the kind usually reserved for a confused child or a senile relative. "Sir, I think there has been a significant misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Misunderstanding. Otis laughed a harsh barking sound. There is no misunderstanding. You offered Mr. Brooks the private suite. I am Mr. Brooks. Mr. Sterling shook his head slowly. No, sir. You are a guest. I was addressing him. The manager extended his hand palm up, gesturing directly at Dante. I was speaking to Mr. Dante Brooks. Mr. Sterling clarified, enunciating every word clearly so there could be no mistake. I was speaking to the owner of this building. The silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. It felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the restaurant. Otis froze mid-step. His mouth, which had been open to shout another insult, hung slack. He blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the information. Owner Otis whispered the word, coming out as a strangled squeak. Yes, sir. Mr. Sterling continued, driving the nail into the coffin. Mr. Dante Brooks owns the Zenith Tower. He owns the land this restaurant sits on. He owns the hotel above us. In fact, he owns the entire city block. I am merely his employee. I watched the blood drain from my father's face. It happened in slow motion. He looked at the manager, waiting for the punchline. He waited for someone to say it was a joke. Then, slowly terrified, he turned his head to look at the man he had just called a vagrant. Dante did not look at Otis. He looked at Mr. Sterling and gave a small, weary nod. Thank you, Sterling. Dante said, his voice calm and commanding. We will take the suite now. But I think we have some uninvited guests sitting at my table. Please ensure they are removed. Otis staggered back, his legs hitting the chair behind him. He looked at Dante's worn sneakers, then at his face. The realization hit him like a freight train. The man he had tried to evict was the landlord. The man he had mocked for being poor held the deed to the ground Otis was standing on. Bradley stared at Dante, his mouth slightly ajar. The color had drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. He was a con artist, and like all con artists, he knew the names of the real players in the city. He knew the name Dante Brooks. It was a name that appeared on deed transfers, building permits, and acquisition headlines in the financial papers he pretended to read. But the Dante Brooks he knew of was a ghost, a recluse, a man who never gave interviews and never appeared at gala dinners. Bradley leaned in close to Chantel, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate rationalization. Babe, listen to me, Bradley hissed, his eyes darting back and forth between the manager and Dante. This has to be a mistake, a coincidence. I know the name Dante Brooks. Everyone on Wall Street knows that name. That guy owns half the skyline, but it cannot be him. Chantel looked at Dante, then back at Bradley, her eyes wide with confusion. Why not? The manager seems pretty sure. Look at him, Chantel. Bradley whispered urgently, gesturing discreetly under the table. Look at his shoes. Look at that t-shirt. Does that look like a billionaire to you? Real billionaires wear suits. They wear Rolexes. This guy looks like he drives an Uber for a living. It is probably just a common name, like John Smith. The manager is just confused. It was a lifeline, and Otis grabbed it with both hands. The idea that his despised son-in-law was actually his superior was a psychological impossibility for him. If Dante was rich, then Otis was wrong, and Otis Brooks was never wrong. Otis let out a harsh, relieved laugh. He turned back to Mr. Sterling, shaking his head with condescending pity. I see what is happening here, Otis said, his voice regaining its arrogant boom. You are new, aren't you? You see the name Brooks on a credit card and you panic. You think every Brooks is the owner. Let me educate you, Mr. Sterling. This man is not a tycoon. He is unemployed. He is my daughter's charity case. Mr. Sterling did not blink. Sir, I assure you. No, you assure me nothing, Otis interrupted, poking a finger into the manager's chest. You are making a fool of yourself. You are bowing to a man who probably cannot even pay for the water he is drinking. Check your system again. Check the ID. You will see that this is Dante Brooks the nobody, not Dante Brooks the landlord. Now stop this comedy routine and kick them out. Bradley nodded vigorously, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Exactly. It is a clerical error. A glitch in the system. Come on, Sterling. Use your eyes. Does this guy look like he owns the Zenith Tower? He looks like he fixes the elevator in the Zenith Tower. I watched them struggle. It was fascinating in a morbid way. They were staring directly at the truth, but their prejudice was a blindfold they refused to take off. To them, poverty was a look, not a financial state. Because Dante did not wear flashy logos or scream about his wealth, he had to be poor. They could not conceive of quiet power. Dante just sat there, swirling his water, watching them debate his existence. He did not offer an ID. He did not argue. He just waited. He knew that the ultimate silencer was walking through the front door at that very moment. The double doors of the restaurant swung open with a heavy thud, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. A hush fell over the dining hall, the kind of silence that only accompanies true, undeniable power. Walking through the entrance was a man who looked like he owned the oxygen we were breathing. It was Arthur Henderson, the CEO of Sovereign Capital and one of the most feared investment bankers in the Midwest. He was flanked by 3 assistants and 2 large men who were clearly private security, their eyes scanning the room for threats. Bradley let out a gasp of relief that sounded more like a sob. He shot up from his chair, knocking over his empty scotch glass in the process. The ice cubes skittered across the tablecloth, but he did not care. He pointed a trembling finger at the approaching group, his face lighting up with a desperate, frantic energy. "There he is!" Bradley shouted, turning to Otis. "That is him, Otis. That is Mr. Henderson. That is the shark I told you about." Otis straightened his tie, his eyes wide with renewed hope. After the humiliating revelation about Dante owning the building my father was drowning, he needed a lifeline, and he looked at Arthur Henderson like a starving man looks at a feast. "He looks serious," Otis whispered. "He is all business," Bradley said, puffing out his chest. "Watch this. Watch how he greets me. We have a rapport." Bradley stepped away from the table, smoothing his suit jacket. He strode toward the center of the aisle, positioning himself directly in Henderson's path. He extended his hand, putting on his best salesman smile, the one he used to charm grandmothers out of their pension funds. "Mr. Henderson," Bradley called out, his voice booming. "Arthur! Over here. It is me, Bradley. I have my father-in-law ready to sign the papers." He lunged forward to shake Henderson's hand, confident that the great man would embrace him as a peer. He never got the chance. Before Bradley could get within 3 feet of the banker, one of the security guards moved with terrifying speed. A massive arm shot out, acting as a steel barrier. The guard did not push Bradley. He simply became a wall that Bradley collided with. The impact stopped my brother-in-law dead in his tracks, knocking the wind out of him. "Step back, sir," the guard rumbled, his voice low and threatening. Bradley stumbled back, his face flushing a deep crimson. He looked around the room, realizing that everyone, including the staff, was watching him be physically rejected. He tried to laugh it off, turning back to our table with a nervous, twitchy smile. "Security protocols," Bradley stammered loud enough for Otis to hear. "He is very high profile. They have to be careful with fans." Henderson did not even break his stride. He did not look at Bradley. He did not look at the hand that was still stupidly extended in the air. He walked past Bradley as if he were a potted plant or a piece of furniture. His gaze was fixed on a specific point in the room, his expression intense and focused. Otis frowned, his hope wavering slightly. "He walked right past you, Bradley." Bradley scrambled back to the table, sweating profusely. "He just did not see me, Otis. The lights are dim. He is probably looking for the private suite. He will circle back. You will see. He is coming to us." But Henderson was not looking for a suite. He was walking in a straight line, cutting through the maze of tables with a singular purpose. And that line led directly to where I was sitting. I took a sip of water, watching Bradley's world crumble in real time. The shark had arrived, but he wasn't here to feed Bradley. He was here to feed on him. Mr. Henderson moved through the dining room like a battleship, cutting through calm waters. He did not look left or right. His eyes were locked on a destination that was definitely not the sweating, panicked man standing in the aisle with his hands still suspended in midair. Bradley stood there, frozen, his face a mask of crumbling arrogance. He had promised a spectacle, a handshake that would seal his status as a financial titan. Instead, he had been treated like an overeager fan at a rock concert blocked by security and discarded without a second thought. Otis, however, was not a man to let reality interfere with his ambition. He saw the snub, but his brain refused to process it as a rejection. In his mind, it was simply a matter of volume. Henderson hadn't heard them. That was the only logical explanation. He stood up, wiping his mouth with his napkin, and stepped out from behind the table, blocking the aisle just enough to be a nuisance, but not a threat. Mr. Henderson Otis called out, his voice taking on that ingratiating, sycophantic tone he usually reserved for senior partners at his law firm. "Over here, sir. It is me, Otis Brooks. I am Bradley's father-in-law. We were just discussing the Helios Fund." He waved his hand, a desperate, frantic motion, trying to flag down the billionaire like one would flag down a taxi in the rain. "I am the one who just authorized the transfer," Otis added, his voice rising in pitch. "The $500,000 buy-in. I am ready to sign the final papers." Mr. Henderson did not slow down. He did not turn his head. He did not even blink. He walked past Otis with such absolute, crushing indifference that it felt violent. The air displaced by his stride ruffled the edge of Otis's jacket. It was the kind of dismissal that destroys careers. It was a statement that said, "You are not even worth the breath it would take to tell you to get out of my way." Otis stood there, his mouth open, watching the back of Henderson's expensive suit move away from him. He looked at Bradley, his eyes wide with confusion and rising panic. "He didn't stop," Otis whispered, his voice trembling. "He walked right past me." "Bradley, why did he walk past me?" Bradley was hyperventilating slightly, loosening his tie. He must be confused. He probably has a meeting in the back. He will circle around. He has to. He knows me. We are racquetball buddies." But Henderson was not circling around. He was not looking for a private room. He stopped. He stopped right in front of the table where the failure and the driver were sitting. He stopped in front of the table covered in tap water glasses and a discarded, grease-stained stock transfer form. Chantel let out a sharp, confused laugh. "What is he doing? Why is he stopping at their table? Did they steal something? Is he going to have them arrested?" Otis turned slowly, watching with bated breath. Yes, that had to be it. Henderson was a man of justice. He must have recognized Dante as a squatter or a fraud. He was going to confront them. He was going to do what Otis had failed to do, throw them out. "Look." Otis hissed, a cruel smile returning to his face. "He is going to give them a piece of his mind. Watch this, Bradley. Watch a real man handle business." But Mr. Henderson did not look angry. He looked respectful. He adjusted his cufflinks, took a deep breath, and stood before my table with the posture of a soldier reporting to a general. He ignored the spilled sauce. He ignored the cheap cutlery. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying amount of professional admiration. The entire restaurant held its breath. Otis leaned in, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the insult that would finally put me in my place. He was waiting for his vindication. He had no idea he was witnessing his own execution. Mr. Henderson stood before our table, looming large in his charcoal suit. To the rest of the room, he was a titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a single phone call. To my family, he was a god they were desperate to worship. But as he looked down at me, his expression held none of the arrogance Bradley had described. There was only respect. Deep, professional, and undeniable respect. He adjusted his cufflinks, took a breath, and then did the unthinkable. He bowed. It was a slight inclination of the head, a gesture of deference that no one in that room had ever seen him perform. "Madam Chairwoman Henderson," said his voice clear and projecting to every corner of the silent restaurant. "I apologize for interrupting your evening. I know you prefer not to discuss business during dinner." Otis made a sound like a dying engine. It was a strangled, high-pitched wheeze that escaped his throat involuntarily. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He looked from Henderson to me, his brain short-circuiting. Madam Chairwoman. Was Henderson mocking me? Was this an elaborate joke? But Henderson was not smiling. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed envelope. However, Henderson continued ignoring the gasps from the surrounding tables. The board grew anxious. We just received the final regulatory approval from the state. The acquisition of the Mercy Hospital network is complete. We just need your signature to release the funds, $400 million as agreed. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. The clinking of silverware stopped. The background music seemed to fade away. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work to peer through the swinging doors. 400 million, Bradley whispered the words slipping out of his mouth like a prayer. Chantel dropped her spoon. It clattered loudly against her china bowl, splattering a drop of melted gold ice cream onto the tablecloth. She stared at me, her eyes wide and terrified, stripping away the layers of makeup and pretense to reveal the scared little girl underneath. I did not look at them. I kept my gaze fixed on Henderson. I reached out and took the envelope from his hand. The paper felt heavy, substantial. It was real. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice steady and cool. "You are efficient as always. I appreciate you bringing this to me personally." "It is my honor," Henderson replied. I placed the envelope on the table right next to my glass of tap water. I felt a hand cover mine. It was Dante. His touch was warm, grounding, and filled with a quiet, triumphant energy. He was not looking at Henderson. He was looking at my father. He was watching Otis crumble, watching the realization slowly dawn behind his eyes that everything he thought he knew was a lie. Dante squeezed my fingers, a signal that the waiting game was over. The trap had been sprung. The cage door was locked. Now it was time to turn on the lights. He leaned in close to me, his lips brushing against my ear, but his voice was loud enough for the paralyzed table to hear. "Time to tell them, honey," Dante whispered. "Time to tell them who really owns this town." Dante released my hand, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man watching the final act of a play he had written. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive wine that had been denied to me, and slowly pushed my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the floor was the only sound in the room. I stood up. But I did not stand up like Simone, the disappointed daughter. I did not stand up like the woman who had been told to drink tap water. I stood up with the posture I used when I walked into a boardroom to fire a negligent executive. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back, and for the first time that night, I let the full weight of my presence fill the space. The transformation was physical. I saw Otis flinch, as if he suddenly did not recognize the person standing in front of him. "You know Bradley," I said, my voice conversational but projecting with a crystal-clear authority that bounced off the mahogany walls. "I was quite confused earlier. You were so specific about your relationship with the CEO of Aura Health. You said he was a shark. You said he eats weaklings for breakfast. And most interestingly, you said you play racquetball with him at the Union League Club every Tuesday." Bradley was trembling. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He tried to speak, but only a dry squeak came out. I walked around the table, my steps slow and predatory, until I was standing directly behind him. I rested my hand on the back of his chair, leaning in close. "I find that fascinating," I continued, "because I hate racquetball. I have never stepped foot inside the Union League Club, and until tonight, I have never had the displeasure of meeting you professionally." Otis looked up at me, his eyes darting back and forth between me and Henderson. "Simone, what are you talking about? Sit down. You are embarrassing us." I ignored him. I reached into the back pocket of my trousers and pulled out a small flat object. It was not paper. It was a heavy laser-engraved card made of 24-karat gold. It was a novelty item my board had given me when we crossed the $100 million valuation mark, but I kept it for moments exactly like this. I tossed the card onto the center of the table. It did not flutter like paper. It hit the wood with a heavy metallic clang that sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Otis looked down. The light from the chandelier hit the gold surface, illuminating the engraved letters. Simone Brooks, founder and CEO, Aura Health Solutions. I am the shark, Bradley. I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I am the one you were waiting for. I am the majority shareholder of the company you lied about knowing, and that man standing over there, Mr. Henderson, he does not work for you. He works for me. Otis picked up the gold card. His hands were shaking so violently that he almost dropped it. He ran his thumb over the engraved letters, staring at them as if they were written in an alien language. CEO, Otis whispered, looking up at me with a face drained of all color. But the computer games. You said you were selling software. I was building a dynasty, Dad, I said coldly. While you were busy being ashamed of me, I was building the future of healthcare. And while you were busy bragging about a fake watch, I was closing a $400 million deal. I looked at Chantel. She was shrinking in her seat, trying to make herself small. You wanted a star, Dad, I asked. You are looking at the sun, and you just stared directly into it. Bradley looked like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack full of rocks. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but the weight of my stare crushed the words in his throat. The gold card on the table seemed to mock him, gleaming under the chandelier light. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at the woman he had dismissed as a failure only an hour ago. You said you invest in Aura Health. I repeated, my voice dropping to a register that was dangerously calm. You stood there and told my father that you were bringing him in on a deal with my company. But here is the problem, Bradley. I review every single capital injection personally. I know the names of every partner, every angel investor, and every institution that holds a stake in my life's work. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I have never seen your name on a contract. I have never seen your firm on a ledger. And I certainly have never authorized you to solicit funds on my behalf. So I am going to ask you once, and I suggest you tell the truth for the first time tonight. Where did the money go? Bradley's eyes darted to the door, looking for an escape route. It is a third-party aggregator, he stammered, sweat dripping down his temple. You would not know the specific channel. It is very complex financial structuring. Mr. Henderson stepped forward. He did not look amused. He held up a tablet he had retrieved from one of his assistants. The screen displayed a complex flow chart of bank transfers, the lines glowing red against a black background. It is not complex at all, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cutting through Bradley's babble like a scalpel. In fact, it is remarkably simple. We took the liberty of tracing the wire transfer Mr. Brooks authorized 20 minutes ago. Our security team monitors all transactions involving Aura Health's name to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. Henderson turned the tablet around so Otis could see it. Otis leaned forward, his hands trembling, squinting at the screen. The $500,000 did not go to the Helios Fund. Henderson explained, tracing the line with his finger. It was routed through a shell company in Delaware and then immediately wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Specifically, an account associated with Galaxy Sportsbook. Otis looked up, his face gray. Sportsbook. It is a gambling site, Mr. Otis Henderson clarified brutally. Your son-in-law did not invest your money. He used your life savings to pay off a massive accumulation of bad debts. You did not buy a portfolio. You bought him another week of freedom before the loan sharks came looking for him. The realization hit Otis with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, his hand clutching his chest. The air seemed to leave his lungs in a sharp, wheezing gasp. He looked at Bradley, the man he had championed, the man he had chosen over me. He saw the truth now. He saw the sweat, the fear, the pathetic desperation of a small-time con man. My house? Otis rasped, his voice barely audible. You gambled my house. Bradley held up his hands, backing away. Otis, listen, it is a sure thing. I have a tip on a horse in Dubai. I can win it back. I just need a little time. Otis made a sound of pure anguish, a guttural cry of a man watching his entire world dissolve. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing, his other hand gripping his shirt over his heart. The betrayal was absolute. He had sold his daughter out for a thief. Otis was gasping for air, his hand clutching his chest as he stared at Bradley with the horror of a man watching a cancer diagnosis unfold in real time. But the surgery was not over. We had removed one tumor, but the infection went deeper. Chantel was trying to inch her way away from her husband, her face contorted into a mask of feigned shock. She reached out to touch Otis's arm, playing the role of the innocent bystander. Daddy, I had no idea, she cried, her voice pitching up into a hysterical whine. You have to believe me, I am a victim here too. He lied to me, he told me he was a genius. Dante stepped forward, intercepting her hand before it could make contact with my father. He did not shove her, but his presence was a physical wall that forced her back into her seat. He took the tablet from Mr. Henderson and swiped the screen with a sharp, decisive motion. Save the tears, Chantel, Dante said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. And frankly, you are a worse liar than your husband. Chantel bristled, her eyes narrowing. Excuse me. I am a businesswoman. I have my own brand. Dante turned the tablet toward the light so the entire table could see the document displayed there. It was a shipping manifest. Let us discuss your brand, Dante said calmly. Chantel Couture. You told your father you designed these pieces yourself in a studio in Milan. You told him the high price point was due to Italian silk and European craftsmanship. He tapped the screen. This is a bulk invoice from a factory in Guangzhou. You are not designing anything. You are buying polyester knockoffs for $3 a pound, cutting out the Made in China tags, and sewing in your own labels. You are upselling sweatshop refuse by 5,000%. That is not fashion, Chantel. That is fraud. Otis looked at the screen, his eyes watering. He saw the pictures of the clothes. He saw the unit price, $2.50. He remembered the check he had written her last month for fabric sourcing, a check for $10,000. But she has a studio, Otis whispered, grasping at straws. She has a storage unit, Dante corrected. And she is not just lying to her customers, she is stealing from you. Dante swiped to the next page. It was a credit report. Your successful daughter is currently $150,000 in debt to her suppliers. Dante continued reading the numbers like a death sentence. She has not paid her warehouse fees in 6 months. And the worst part? She used your name, Otis. She forged your signature as the guarantor on her business loans. When she defaults next month, and she will, the collectors are not coming for her. They are coming for you. Otis made a low, guttural sound like an animal caught in a trap. He looked at Chantel, who was now sobbing into her napkin, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She did not deny it. Her silence was a confession. And one last thing, Dante said, his gaze shifting to my father's wrist. He pointed at the rose-gold Patek Philippe that Otis had been flashing around the restaurant all night. You might want to take that off, Otis. It is irritating my skin just looking at it. Otis looked down at the watch, the symbol of his retirement, the gift that was supposed to prove his daughter's love and success. It is a fake, Otis asked, his voice broken. It is not just a fake, Dante said ruthlessly. It is a bad fake. The movement is quartz, the gold is plated brass, and the diamonds are cubic zirconia. Real market value. About $50 on Canal Street. She did not fly to Milan, Otis. She probably bought it out of a trunk in a parking lot. Otis unclasped the watch with trembling fingers. He held it in his palm, feeling the cheapness of it, the lie of it. He looked at Bradley the thief. He looked at Chantel the fraud. Then he looked at me, the daughter he had disowned, standing next to the billionaire he had insulted. The weight of his own stupidity crushed him. He dropped the watch onto the table. It landed with a hollow, tinny clatter next to the real gold card I had thrown there moments before. The contrast was the final nail in the coffin of his pride. Otis slumped in his chair, his hand massaging the center of his chest. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking old, frail, and incredibly small. The revelation about the fake watch and the gambling debts had stripped away his armor. He was no longer the patriarch. He was just a foolish old man who had been taken for a ride. But I was not done. The surgery had to be precise to be effective, and there was still necrotic tissue to cut away. "Does your chest hurt, Dad?" I asked, my voice devoid of the warmth he used to rely on. "It feels tight, doesn't it? Just like it did last winter when you collapsed in the study." Otis looked up at me, his eyes watery and confused. He nodded weakly. "You remember that day, don't you?" I continued, stepping closer until I loomed over him. "You remember waking up in the VIP recovery suite? You remember the doctors telling you that the bill was settled? You looked at Chantel and she smiled and told you she sold her debut collection to save you. You cried. You told everyone she was your guardian angel." I glanced at Chantel. She was staring at her lap, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "That was a lie, Dad. Chantel has never sold a collection. Chantel has never made a profit in her life. The only thing she has ever successfully produced is debt." I leaned down, placing my hands on the table, forcing him to look at me. "I paid for your heart, Otis. I wired $200,000 to the hospital billing department from my personal account. I did it anonymously because I knew your pride was more fragile than your arteries. I let her take the credit because I wanted you to be happy. I wanted you to feel loved. And how did you repay me? You mocked me. You told me I was a disappointment while your heart beat with the blood I bought for you." Otis let out a sob, a dry cracking sound. He looked at Chantel, pleading for a denial, but she offered none. The truth hung heavy in the air. "And the house?" I asked, twisting the knife. "The Hyde Park estate. The symbol of the Brooks family legacy." Otis flinched. The house is the family seat. It was never yours," I said softly. Otis blinked. "What Grandma did not trust you, Dad," I revealed, dropping the final bombshell. "When she died, she didn't leave the house to you. She knew you were reckless. She knew you had a gambling problem in the 90s. She left the deed to me." The room went silent. Otis shook his head, denial warring with memory. "No, no," the lawyers said. The lawyers followed my instructions. I cut him off. I was 22. I had just started my company. I didn't need the house and I didn't want to humiliate you. So I instructed the estate to transfer the title to your name. I gave it to you. I gave you your legacy because I respected you as my father. I gave you the roof over your head. I pointed to the blue folder sticking out of Bradley's briefcase, the folder that contained the fresh lien Otis had just signed. "And what did you do with my gift? You used it as collateral for a Ponzi scheme. You just signed away the only thing keeping you off the streets to a man who just lost it all on a horse race in the Cayman Islands. You didn't just lose your house, Dad. You threw away my inheritance. Again." Otis looked at his hands. He looked at the signature on the contract in his mind. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he was not a tycoon. He was homeless. And he had done it to himself, cheered on by the people who were currently trying to disappear into the woodwork. You gave me the house," Otis whispered, his voice broken. "Yes," I replied, straightening up and stepping back to stand beside my husband. "And tonight, you gave it to the bank." The silence that followed my declaration was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a collapsing building. Otis sat frozen, his eyes darting from the blue folder containing the mortgage lien to the fake watch on the table, and finally to the daughter he had spent decades worshipping. The narrative he had constructed for his life, the successful patriarch with his elite children, disintegrated into dust. The reality was a horror show. He was a bankrupt old man, sitting between a thief and a fraudster. A guttural roar ripped from his throat, a sound so primal it made the silverware vibrate. Otis lunged. He did not stand up gracefully. He exploded from his chair, overturning it with a crash. His heavy hands swung out in a blind, violent arc and connected with Bradley's face. The sound of the slap was sickeningly loud, like a gunshot in a library. "You parasite," Otis screamed, grabbing Bradley by the lapels of his expensive suit. "You told me it was a sure thing. You told me it was an investment. You gambled my home. You gambled my life." Bradley stumbled back, blood trickling from his lip, his hands raised in pathetic defense. "Otis! Otis, please! It was a liquidity issue. I can fix it!" "Liar!" Otis shrieked, shoving him backward into a waiter who was trying to intervene. Chantel screamed, jumping up to pull her father away. "Daddy, stop! You are making a scene! Stop it!" Otis spun on her, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked at the face he had cherished. The face he had claimed was the image of perfection. Without hesitation, he backhanded her. It wasn't a closed fist, but the force of it sent Chantel sprawling into her chair, clutching her cheek in disbelief. "Do not call me Daddy," Otis spat, shaking with rage. "You are no daughter of mine. You are a leech. A two-bit con artist selling trash and calling it couture. I gave you everything. I paid for your studio, I paid for your inventory, and you forged my signature. You stole from the hand that fed you. It was a shark tank, and the sharks were finally eating each other." Chantel shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Bradley. "It was his idea. He told me to sign it. He said we would pay it back before you noticed. He is the addict. I just wanted to make you proud." "You wanted to make me poor," Otis roared. He looked around the wreckage of the dinner. The spilled wine, the overturned chair, the terrified onlookers. He realized with terrifying clarity that he was alone. He had no house. He had no savings. He had no legacy. Then his eyes landed on me. The rage instantly evaporated, replaced by a desperate, cloying panic. He saw the gold card on the table. He saw Mr. Henderson standing respectfully behind me. He saw the power. He saw the money. Otis stumbled toward me, pushing past the debris. His face crumpled into a mask of pathetic sorrow. He reached out his hands, trembling, trying to grab my arm. "Simone," he gasped, tears streaming down his face. "Baby girl, you see what they did to me? You see how they used me?" He fell to his knees. Right there on the restaurant floor, Otis Brooks, the man who had been too proud to look at me for 10 years, was on his knees clutching the hem of my pants. "I was an old fool, Simone. I was tricked. My mind. It is not what it used to be. They preyed on me, but you are my smart girl. You are my successful girl. You always were the special one." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, begging not for forgiveness, but for a bailout. "You have the power, Simone. You can fix this. You can call the bank. You can buy the house back. Please, do not let your father end up on the street. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, right? Save me. Save your daddy." I felt the wet heat of my father's tears soaking into the fabric of my trousers. It was a sensation that should have evoked pity, but instead it felt like a stain. For 30 years I had craved his affection. I had worked, achieved, and suffered in silence, just to hear him say he was proud. Now he was finally saying the words, but they were not born of love. They were born of greed. He did not want me. He wanted my net worth. I opened my mouth to speak, to perhaps offer one last word of closure, but Dante moved first. He did not shout. He did not lunge. He simply stepped between us, his movement fluid and absolute, He reached down and gripped Otis's wrist, the same wrist that had been flashing the fake watch all night, and peeled his hand off my leg with the detachment of a sanitation worker removing debris. "Do not touch her," Dante said. The command was low, vibrating with a suppressed rage that was far more terrifying than Otis's screaming tantrums. Dante shoved Otis back, not hard enough to injure him, but hard enough to put him on his backside on the cold floor. Otis looked up, blinking through his tears. "Dante, please, talk to her. You are a sensible man. We are family." "Family." Dante repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He loomed over my father, casting a long shadow that swallowed Otis whole. "I have sat here for 2 hours, Otis. I listened to you mock her education. I watched you throw a heavy fountain pen at her throat. I listened to you laugh while your other daughter called her a ghost and a failure." Dante's eyes were cold, hard flint. 30 minutes ago, you looked her in the eye and told her she was a disappointment. You told her she was jealous. You told her that you preferred to lose everything rather than listen to her advice. You called her a failure in front of a room full of strangers. Otis stammered, raising his hands. "I was angry, I did not mean it." "You meant every word." Dante cut him off. "You only changed your mind because you saw the gold card. You do not love her. You love what she can do for you. And that transaction is closed. You do not have the right to call her daughter anymore. You lost that right when you sold her out for a fake watch and a liar in a cheap suit." Dante straightened up, turning his back on the pathetic figure on the floor. He looked at Mr. Sterling, who was standing ready with 2 large security guards. "Mr. Sterling," Dante said, his voice returning to the cool professional tone of the building's owner. "Yes, Mr. Brooks. These individuals have assaulted guests, destroyed property, and caused a significant disturbance," Dante said, gesturing to the trio of disasters. "I believe we have a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior in my establishment." "We do indeed, sir," Mr. Sterling replied. "Please remove them," Dante ordered, "and ensure they are permanently banned from the premises. If they attempt to return, have them arrested for trespassing." Otis scrambled to get up, his dignity completely gone. "No, you cannot do this. I am Otis Brooks Simone. Tell them to stop." The security guards moved in. They were not gentle. One grabbed Bradley by the collar of his jacket, hauling him up like a sack of flour. Another took Chantel by the arm as she screamed about her shoes. The largest guard stepped toward Otis. "Simone!" Otis shrieked, reaching out for me as the guard took hold of his shoulder. "Don't let them take me. I am your father. I am your father." I stood perfectly still. I watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of peace. The man who had controlled my life through fear and guilt was being dragged away, his heels skidding on the polished floor. Mr. Henderson stepped to the side to let the security team pass. He did not look at them. He looked at me, a silent nod of acknowledgement. As they reached the double doors, Otis turned back one last time, his face twisted in a rictus of panic. "Simone." I finally looked away. I turned to my husband, the man who had defended me when I could not defend myself. "Let us go to the suite, Dante," I said softly. "I believe we have a celebration to attend." The cold Chicago wind whipped against my face as we stepped out onto the curb, but it felt refreshing after the suffocating atmosphere of the restaurant. The valet was already there, holding open the door of our phantom black Maybach. It was a silent beast of a car, commanding and impenetrable, a stark contrast to the rust bucket Bradley had mocked earlier. Just down the sidewalk, huddled near a bus stop sign, my family stood shivering. Bradley was wiping blood from his lip with a silk handkerchief. Chantel was hugging her arms, her fake designer heels useless against the cold pavement, and Otis looked like a ghost. When he saw the car, he broke into a run. It was a clumsy, desperate shamble. He threw himself at the vehicle just as I settled into the leather seat. He banged his fist against the tinted glass, his breath fogging the window. "Simone, please, you cannot leave me like this." Dante looked at me from the other side of the back seat. His hand hovered over the button to lock the doors. "It is your call," he said softly. I pressed the button to lower the window. It slid down with a quiet hum. Otis gripped the frame, his knuckles white, his face inches from mine. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man facing oblivion. "Daughter," he panted, reverting to the affectionate term he hadn't used since I was 12. "Please, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But you fixed it, right? You have the money. You can stop the bank. Do not let them take the house. It is all I have left." I looked at him, feeling a strange hollowness. The anger was gone. In its place was just pity. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice calm. "I do have the money. In fact, Mr. Henderson handled it before we even left the table." Otis let out a sob of relief, his knees buckling slightly. "Thank God. Thank you, Simone. I knew you would not abandon me. I knew you were a good daughter. I will make it up to you. I did not do it for you." I cut him off, my tone turning to ice. "I did it because that house was my mother's sanctuary. I will not let a gambling addict and a fraudster turn her memory into collateral damage." I signaled for the driver to start the engine. "I purchased the debt, Otis. I bought the note from the bank 5 minutes ago. I own the lien now. The bank is not coming for the house." Otis smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "Thank you. We can start over. I will pay you back, I swear." "No, you won't," I said. "Because you have nothing. And we are not starting over. Here is the deal. You can live in that house until the day you die. I will pay the utilities. I will pay the taxes. You will never be homeless." I paused, leaning forward so he wouldn't miss a single word. "But the deed stays in my name. You are a guest in my property. And that invitation does not extend to them." I glanced over his shoulder at Chantel and Bradley, who were watching with fearful eyes. "They are banned, Dad. If I find out Bradley has stepped foot on the property, or if Chantel moves back in, I will evict you the same day. You chose them over me tonight. Now you have to choose between them and a roof over your head." Otis looked back at his golden child, then back at me. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg for Chantel, but the cold wind hit him, and the reality of his poverty silenced him. He realized he was holding a losing hand. He nodded slowly, his head bowing in defeat. "Good," I said. I pressed the button. The window rolled up, sealing me inside the warmth of my success. As the car pulled away, I watched in the side mirror. Otis was standing alone on the curb, shrinking into the distance, a small, dark figure against the city lights. He had his house, but he had lost his family. And I was finally free. The window had almost sealed shut when I signaled the driver to stop. The glass lowered again with a soft mechanical hum, stopping halfway. Otis was still standing there, his hands clasped together in a posture of pathetic gratitude, unaware that I held one final crushing card in my hand. He stepped forward, eagerly, thinking I was about to offer him cash or perhaps a ride. He looked at me with the eyes of a beaten dog waiting for a treat. "One last thing, Otis," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "And this is non-negotiable. Anything, Simone," he promised, nodding rapidly. "Anything you want." "I want the truth," I said. "You spent the last 10 years telling your church group, your country club, and every relative we have that I was a failure. You destroyed my reputation to build up Chantel's lies. Now you are going to fix it." Otis blinked, confused. "How? You are going to post a public apology on your social media," I commanded. "You are going to tag everyone. The pastor, the club president, the entire family. You are going to admit that you lied about my education. You are going to admit that I paid for your heart surgery. And you are going to admit that Chantel is a fraud who stole your identity." Otis swallowed hard. He looked terrified. To a narcissist, public humiliation is a fate worse than death. That will ruin me, Simone. I will be a laughingstock." I looked at him with zero sympathy. "You are already a laughingstock, Dad. I am just giving you a chance to be an honest one. Post it by tomorrow morning. If I do not see it, the eviction notice is on your door by noon." Otis hesitated. He looked back toward the bus stop where Chantel and Bradley were huddled. Chantel saw him looking. She waved frantically, shivering in her thin dress, mouthing the word, "Daddy." She looked cold, miserable, and desperate. She was his golden child. She was the one he had molded in his own image. Then Otis looked at the Maybach. He looked at the warmth radiating from the interior. He thought about the Hyde Park mansion with its heating, its soft beds, and its status. He did the math. He weighed his love for his favorite daughter against his own comfort. It took him exactly 3 seconds to choose. He turned his back on Chantel. He did not wave to her. He did not signal her to come over. He turned back to me, his face hardening into a mask of self-preservation. "She is a thief," Otis said, his voice trembling but distinct. "She deceived me. She deceived us all. I will write the post, Simone. I will tell the world what she did. I will wash my hands of her." I stared at him, feeling a final wave of disgust wash over me. He had not learned a thing. He wasn't apologizing because he was sorry. He wasn't banning Chantel because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because I was the new winning horse, and he wanted to bet on me. He was willing to throw Chantel into the gutter just as easily as he had thrown me, as long as it kept a roof over his head. I nodded slowly. "The house is yours, Otis. Alone." I pressed the button. This time I did not stop the window. As the glass rose, shutting out the noise of the city, I saw Otis turn and start walking away. He did not walk toward Chantel. He walked toward the subway station, clutching his jacket tight, leaving his golden child and her husband shivering on the sidewalk. They shouted after him, but he did not look back. He was a survivor. A cockroach in a suit scuttling toward safety. "Drive," I said to the driver. Dante took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The car pulled away, gliding smoothly into the traffic. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. The gavel fell 48 hours later, but not in a courtroom. It happened in the sterile, fluorescent purgatory of O'Hare International Airport. Bradley stood at the international ticket counter, sweat staining the armpits of the same rumpled suit he had worn to the dinner. He was attempting to purchase a one-way ticket to Belize using a corporate credit card that had been flagged and canceled hours prior. When the decline tone sounded for the third time, the ticket agent looked up with pity, but Bradley did not wait for her explanation. He grabbed his briefcase and ran. He did not make it to the exit. 2 plainclothes officers from the Economic Crimes Unit intercepted him near the sliding glass doors. There was no cinematic chase, no dramatic struggle. One officer simply grabbed Bradley's arms, spinning him around, while the other clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. Bradley screamed. He screamed that it was a misunderstanding, that he was a personal friend of Arthur Henderson, that he was a victim of a banking error. The officers ignored him, guiding him firmly into the back of a waiting squad car. The charge was wire fraud and grand larceny, specifically regarding the unauthorized transfer of $500,000 from the account of Otis Brooks. The financial genius who claimed to move markets was processed into county jail with nothing but the lint in his pockets. Across the city, the other half of the golden couple was facing a different kind of tribunal. Chantel sat in her so-called design studio, which was actually a drafty, rented loft above a dry cleaner in a failing industrial district. The pounding on her front door was rhythmic and terrifying. It was not the police. It was the private debt collectors hired by the logistics company she owed, and they were far less polite than the law. With the lights off and the curtains drawn to pretend she was not home, Chantel did the only thing she knew how to do. She turned on her ring light. She applied fresh mascara just so she could cry it off for effect. She opened her social media app, hit the Go Live button, and framed her face in a tragic close-up. "Guys," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a practiced vulnerability that had worked for years. "I do not know what to do. My family, they turned on me. My sister, she is so jealous of my success. She convinced my dad to kick me out. I am homeless. I am scared. Please, if you can donate to the link in my bio, anything helps. I just want to survive. I just want to create art. She waited for the sympathy hearts to float up the screen. She waited for the donation notifications to ping. Instead, she got an avalanche. The comment section exploded, moving so fast it was a blur of text. But the message was unified, and it was brutal. Liar. Scammer. We saw your dad's post. AliExpress reseller. Give the money back. I had kept my word. Otis had posted his humiliating apology that morning, tagging every major influencer and family friend in Chicago. But I had gone a step further. I had uploaded a zipped folder to a popular consumer watchdog forum. It contained the Guangzhou shipping manifest, the credit default notices, and the appraisal of the fake Patek Philippe. The internet detectives had done the rest. Chantel watched in horror as her viewer count spiked, not with fans but with witnesses to her execution. Someone posted a side-by-side photo of her couture gown next to the $5 listing on a Chinese wholesale site. Another user posted the public record of Bradley's arrest, which had just hit the news wire. The narrative she had spent years building collapsed in seconds. "You are a fraud," a top comment read, pinned by thousands of likes. "Your sister paid for your dad's heart surgery, and you stole the credit. You are done." Chantel screamed, clawing at the phone to end the stream, but her hands were shaking too badly. The last image the world saw of her was not a victim, but a cornered, exposed narcissist, her face twisted in ugly, selfish rage as the illusion shattered. The screen went black, but the comments kept coming. In the digital age, shame is forever. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a sanctuary of silence and soft leather, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the last 2 hours. The city of Chicago streamed past the tinted windows, a blur of amber streetlights and towering steel. But for the first time in my life, I was not looking at the city as a battlefield to be conquered. I was just watching it pass, feeling a strange, weightless sensation in my chest. It was the absence of a burden I had not realized I was carrying until it was gone. The constant gnawing need to prove myself, to scream my worth into a void that refused to echo back, had finally vanished. Dante reached across the center console, finding my hand in the darkness. He lifted it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. His eyes, usually so sharp and guarding, were soft now. "You did well," he murmured, his voice low and vibrating with pride. "It is over, Simone. They can never hurt you again." I squeezed his hand, leaning my head back against the headrest. "I feel tired," I admitted, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. "But it is a good tired. Like I just finished a marathon I have been running since I was 16. "You won the race," Dante said simply. "Now you get to stop running." I looked out the window. We passed the skyline I helped build, the hospitals. My software optimized the world that respected me. I realized that my family's approval was the only currency I could not earn, simply because they were too morally bankrupt to afford it. They were hollow people, echoing with jealousy and greed, and I had spent years trying to fill them with my own substance. It was a fool's errand, and tonight, the fool had finally grown up. My phone buzzed in my lap, a single short vibration that signaled a text message. I picked it up, the screen glowing bright in the dim cabin. The name Dad flashed across the top, a contact name I had saved with hope so many years ago. I opened the message. I did it. The post is up. I tagged the pastor and the club president, just like you said. Everyone is seeing it. I held up my end of the bargain. "When can we talk about the utility bills? I am going to need money for the heating oil next month. Call me sweetie. Love, Dad." I stared at the words. Even in defeat, he was transactional. Even in apology, he was asking for something. There was no apology for the years of neglect. There was only compliance in exchange for cash. He was not a father, he was a tenant. And he had just paid his rent. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was the clean, sterile numbness of a scar that has finally healed over. My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped his name. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card, past the years of unanswered calls and ignored birthday wishes. I found the option written in red text. Block this caller. I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list. I pressed block contact without a millisecond of hesitation. The name Dad disappeared, replaced by a generic string of numbers silenced forever. I did not stop there. I held down the power button on the side of the phone. The screen went black, the little loading wheel spinning for a second, before fading into nothingness. I dropped the phone into my purse and snapped the clasp shut. The sound was final, like a book closing. "Everything okay?" Dante asked, watching me closely. I turned to him, the city lights reflecting in my eyes. I felt lighter than air. "Yes," I said, and for the first time I meant it completely. "I just took out the last of the trash. Let us go home." The Rolls-Royce turned the corner, disappearing into the night, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, where it belonged. The story of Simone and the Brooks family serves as a powerful reminder that you cannot buy the respect of people who profit from your insecurity. For years, Simone fell into the trap of believing that if she just achieved more, if she became richer, smarter, or more generous, her father would finally see her. But the harsh truth is that some people are committed to misunderstanding you because your success shines a light on their failures. Otis and Chantel represent the loud economy of life, the obsession with appearances, the desperate need for validation, and the emptiness of living a lie. Simone represents the quiet economy, dignity, integrity, and the power of walking away. The ultimate victory wasn't Simone revealing her wealth. It was her realizing that her father's validation was a currency that had no value. True peace comes when you stop trying to prove your worth to people who don't have the capacity to value you. Cutting off toxic family members isn't an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-preservation. You don't lose friends or family when you set boundaries. You lose parasites. Are you holding onto a relationship that drains you just because of history or blood? It might be time to press that block button and drive away. Share this story if you believe that respect must be earned, never owed.